Well, welcome everyone to the final session of the ITRC training program on building community-based, culturally accountable, population-level mental wellness and resilience. And today joining us is going to be Dr. Theopia Jackson, who's going to talk about how to address the intersectionality of traumas to build resilience within BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I'm going to then close out the session by trying to pull it all together, provide a summary to all of you, what the key messages have been, and what we can now do and hope you will all do as time goes on to build community-based mental wellness and resilience. As before we get going, I want to thank all of our co-sponsors with a final shout out to the American Public Health Association for offering the continuing education credits for everyone for no cost, and to the Trauma Resource Institute for helping with the technology aspects of it. And I want everybody just to give a big shout out and maybe even clap for Keisha Lindor, who's on the line, who has helped with all the technology stuff. And she's really made this go incredibly smoothly, which is very unusual for any programs that we do online, which always seems to have something happen. So I can get this to move. Just a brief introduction for Dr. Jackson. Black, Indigenous, people of color experience many types of historic and ongoing traumas and pileups of toxic stresses that interact with each other, feedback on each other, and just really become cumulative. And all of those intersections are aggravated or can be aggravated by the climate emergency. And the climate emergency is likely to produce all sorts of new traumas for BIPOC communities as well. This makes building wellness and resilience even more important, but it's different in different communities. So I am just very honored to introduce Dr. Theopia Jackson, who's squeezed some time into her schedule to make a presentation to us. I was trying to get Theopia involved earlier in the program before we set up the schedule, but we just couldn't make it happen. So I'm glad we found a time now. Theopia is the director and department chair of the Humanistics and Clinical Psychology program at Saybrook University. And she's the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and clearly one of the leaders in really helping communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color address and deal with trauma and adversity. And it's really an honor to have Theopia here today. And also I will say that Theopia has been very involved with the development of the ITRC policy that we've been also working on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Theopia. Theopia, it's all yours.
Thank you. I can share my screen and keep us going with things going smoothly for the program. Thank you for that very gracious invitation. I'm pleased to see everyone that's here. I also want to acknowledge Peggy Bloom, who's on in my own tradition, because you two have influenced my work. And I'm very much appreciative to be here with colleagues, scholars, and folks who are committed to this place. And Bob, you are amazing. So in the spirit of our rituals that have begun here in terms of Resilience Pause, I wanted to invite us to journey with me in this one that I'd like to gift to the community. And here we go. Get the sound up. They say beauty comes from a spirit that has weathered many hardships in life and somehow continues with resilience. Grace can be found in a soul that ages softly, even amid the tempest. I think the loveliest by far is the one whose gentle heart bears 100 scars from caring, yet still finds a way to pick up the lamp one more time to light the way for love, by Susan Freiburg. Please take a moment to breathe into this space. The feltness of the sound, the comforting words of the poem, the images of love. As we tap into our collective resilience today. Oops. Thank you for this moment, for joining with me on that venture. But before I get to the next slide, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and just say for yourself how you're feeling resilience from this experience. And to keep the lens on of resilience. How are you seeing and feeling, tasting, breathing, touching, smelling the fullness of resilience? And it is through those lenses, through those spaces, I ask you to see these images. Acknowledge the pain, but see them through the lens of resilience. See them through the lens of resilience. The enduring capacity of the human spirit. When we think about this concept of intersectionality, as you reflect on the quotes that are sitting here, BIPOC communities, many communities of color, have been existing in a state of for a very long time. Much of this has been in the context of complex trauma, historical trauma, and more importantly, dear colleagues, persistent trauma that manifests itself in different ways based on the social, political context of the time. That for many BIPOC communities, particularly here in the United States, there has never been a post. It has only been different levels of acuity, levels of awareness, levels of impact. While we also contend with all that hits our entire community, from climate changes to human disasters, are all sitting in the context of this type of structural racism, structural oppression, and white supremacy ideology. So that even those with good intentions who come willing to help side by side are unaware that they are coming in the context of and impacted by structural racism, structural oppression. That where we are today, in this moment, the murder felt around the world has to be clear evidence that we need a collective healing, collective accountability, collective resilience. This is not a BIPOC problem. We are not victims. It is a collective human problem of levels of awareness that each and every one of us on this call, regardless of how we identify, have in fact been touched by structural racism and oppression. It informs implicit bias. It informs that part of who we are and cultural values that we may have that have gone unexamined, so that even with good intentions, good-minded folks we play a role in the perpetuation of structural racism, structural oppression, even when we're coming in to help. I wanted to shift here then as we think about this to offer a framing, that of thinking about a tunnel. As colleagues, regardless of how you practice, I presume that there's been a space and time where you've had a lot going on, a lot to hold in a moment. You've got these due dates over you that you must produce. The pressures are real, so real that you don't have time to eat well, sleep well, love well, give well. All of a sudden, you know, if you're that mom who's running the household and the workforce, you know, all of a sudden the children are getting a different kind of breakfast because you just got to get through this time to get to that deadline. And once that deadline is hit, then you can breathe, recalibrate, and reconnect to that baseline of being for you. I submit for many of us, though, that urgent space of needing to always manage a lot and not having the capacity to recalibrate, rebalance, and breathe has been the experience for many folks in BIPOC communities, depending on where they're situated in our country. And I would also say now that COVID has invited everyone to endure this lived way of being, because many of our communities, regardless of how we identify, have been in this state of tunnel experience since March of 2020. So with this framing then, we can think about this as during this time, it's about scarcity. I don't have the mental space to think, the physical space to think, to take in. It's not that I can't do it, I just literally don't have the capacity in this moment because of the urgency and the complexities of what's around me. So that's a scarcity model versus saying that there's something wrong with me or I'm missing something. And then it can shift us into, how do I create bandwidth? How do I show myself grace? How do I give myself capacity? So I wanted to offer this as another framing when thinking about working with BIPOC communities, that what you may see in behaviors that looks like they're not ready to accept the great things that you're wanting to bring in may have less to do with a sense of not caring or devaluing or dismissing, and more to do with the capacity. Scarcity. So sometimes we have to help set the table before people can partake of the goods, and building out bandwidth. So what is the bandwidth? And for many BIPOC communities, the bandwidth is going to also sit in recognizing the historical, social, political, persistent context in which they're living their lives. This is another way of thinking about bandwidth. I like this last one here as you're taking in these words, with the last one around the candy by the cashier's register. You know, I just don't have the bandwidth anymore to refuse this candy bar. So I've walked through the grocery store the entire time, made good, healthy choices, told myself I'm gonna eat good, eat right. And then by the time I get to the cash register and the candy is right there at eyes length, arm length, I've lost the bandwidth. I'm depleted now. I don't have the capacity to shore myself up as I make informed decisions. So understanding this, as I said, within BIPOC communities is about the issue of scarcity. So how do we first understand what's already known at a national, global levels just by those who've already been doing the work, lessons learned? So before we're going in to help, we were already trying to identify who's already been successful in those communities, and if so, what helped them to be successful? And more importantly, where did they fall short? What were the lessons learned? How do we do what we're doing here, which I greatly appreciate, which is doing this from a cross-disciplinary perspective. It's true for all folks, but definitely in BIPOC communities, you're not going to be as successful if you're coming in straight from one science. I'm going to use mental health as an example. I can't just go in and provide mental health therapy if I haven't paid attention to lessons learned from our ecologists about what needs to happen in an environmental way for it to be safe for me to be, for me to be safe, and also for the communities I'm wanting to serve to be safe. So I have to work alongside that environmentalist. So we as professionals should be working collaboratively across disciplines, forming what we, if we say it takes a village to raise a child, well, what happens when a village is hurting? Then who's going to heal the village? So we may think of ourselves as a professional village. This also lends to us thinking about becoming, fostering, being a good cultural ally. And being a good cultural ally is a developmental process. It's not something we jump into. It's not an either or, it is a becoming. And because it also comes with a certain level of cost benefit analysis. If I identify, which I do as a heterosexual woman, and I'm wanting to be a good ally in the LGBTQI communities, I have to really ask myself, what does that mean for me? And what am I willing to put on the table? Where's my skin in the game? Because what that may mean is if I am in a family system that is very strong in a religious practice, that is very clear to demonize the lifestyle or the ways in which my colleagues who are LGBTQI live their lives, then I have to already say, at what cost? Am I willing to shake up the family rituals and ways of being in order for me to be a good ally? Sometimes people jump into being an ally before they've done that cost benefit analysis. And then when they realize the what is at risk for them personally, it only further causes pain for them as well as that which they were trying to achieve. Becoming a good ally in these communities also requires active listening before acting. What is needed here? What's been working here? How can I help? What, more importantly, whatever it is I have to bring, how does it really fit in? Or what, if any, adaptation do I need to do in order for it to be beneficial for this particular community? And you do need to literally meet people figuratively where they are, how they're showing up. And the last point I want to bring up that I want to hone in on is this idea of intention versus impact. We can always have good intentions what we're bringing to the table, but have we thought about the potential for adverse impact? As we continue in this conversation, I do see myself as contributing to all of what's been done already in this space. And I want to appreciate Bob and my colleagues for setting this up, because these are not isolated conversations, but contributing ones to what you've already experienced. So I hope it is generative for you and insightful as we continue in this conversation, because what's at risk? It's a high stakes risk. Our collective humanity is at risk. When we think about what's going on in BIPOC communities, we must say to ourselves, how does it also impact me? The murder of George Floyd so much symbolizes it. I will take the leap to say anyone with a heart who was not touched in some felt way from that image, I worry about them. Regardless of who we are, we all felt that pain. So the idea of systemic racism and oppression has impacted every one of us in America. We're just in different places of acknowledging and recognizing. So what I'm contributing is, when you think about BIPOC communities, ask yourself, how has systemic racism, oppression impacted me, and how is it manifesting in the work that I'm trying to do as I'm trying to help communities move forward? Again, good intentions, but not appreciating the potential adverse impact. A beautiful, simple example is when you're going into communities and you put together these wonderful hair products and cleansings and whatnot, and then you realize, wait a minute, and you realize sometimes in a painful way that Black hair needs a different type of hair product that no one thought about before they put together these beautiful care packages that you're coming into the community to give. And when you give them, some folks will take it quietly, and when you're not looking, discard it. Others will maybe give it to someone else. Others might say, okay, let me make a little bit of a profit and see if I can get a buck for it. And then there may be those who tell you explicitly how wrong what you just gave them was. And then there are those who will say it in a more kind way. All of these are normal responses to abnormal situations. So, what I'm suggesting here, again, is collective healing, healing the village that heals the child. And we are part of the village as professionals. We're not the experts, we are the conduits of change. And for effective change, we must be willing to change as well too, and learn with and learn from, as you'll see. Because resilience is not just an individual personal thing. I argue intently that is a communal or community event as well, and a spiritual one. What we call mental health, for me as a person who's continuing to study African wisdom, I interpret it as a psycho-spiritual woundedness. That the mental illness that we talk about in our Western societies is actually a manifestation of unresolved structural oppression, racism, and white supremacy ideology that America has not healed itself from. But the psycho-spiritual woundedness is what has also gone unattended to in many BIPOC communities. And spirituality is much more complex than religion. Religion is the organized manifestation of the spiritual essence of being and the ways of being, and our connectedness not only to all living life in this space, but many communities of color or indigenous people. This is true of those of African ancestry, to our levels of awareness and recognizing of this, is that there is a communal spiritness for those not only who've gone on before us in terms of our ancestors, but those who have yet to be born. And this can manifest itself sometimes, and at least I've heard in various ways in Black communities. A baby is born into the world. And as we get to know that child's spirit within the first 9 months, we say, that child's been here before. There's something wise and wisdom about them that we can feel their greatness, as if this is another spirit that's coming back to us. Not a spirit that's inhabiting us or taking us over in a pathologizing way, but one that's part of the life force of being engaged in living in a living world, in an organic space. As we tap into approaching our communities and learning from BIPOC communities, that as professionals, we should be actualizing cultural humility and releasing ourselves from the intellectual engagement of cultural competence, because that still focuses on what I need to know about the other, as if I'm not in relationship with. Whereas cultural humility says, this is an ongoing thing. As I come to know this community, I should be learning more about me. I got skin in the game here. I am not an objective bystander or an expert or the scientist. I am a human spirit joining another human spirit, adding that which I think I know in terms of my science, my professional science, with the communal wisdom of the community to see what we can co-create that's going to make all of us feel good and feel better in this world. This is the space that we are in this moment. So I would invite us to embrace this idea of cultural humility and suspend for a moment that which we think we know. And a concrete example I would give of this is, I remember being in graduate school and being told of this story in one of my multicultural courses, that there was this awareness that when you're working with Eskimo communities, that they refer to non-biological or legally related persons as cousins. So there's this group of graduate students who are going to do some interviews with children around who's in their family and how they think about family. And so there's wonderful European American researcher talking with a young Eskimo child. And finally, the researcher breaks the frame and says, wait a minute, I was told that you guys refer to non-kinfolk as cousins. And the child in their infinite wisdom says, I didn't know you white boys knew about that. Yes, I can talk to you about it now. So in this simplicity, what they're saying is, and many of us as social scientists really get this, is that it really is the importance of the question, not the answer. We must find the right question that allows for genuine information to emerge that can help us be better in these communities versus trying to find the question that connects directly to the service I'm wanting to provide so I can justify my service. So again, embracing the idea of cultural humility, because the most serious barrier to culturally appropriate care is not a lack of knowledge of the details of any given cultural orientation, but the provider's failure to develop self-awareness and a respectful attitude toward diverse points of view. So we do need to understand that taking more of a both and approach and you, whereas again, in our Western ways of being trained, we are focused on an either or. It's either right or it's wrong. It's both and it's more. Because as we enter into the space with our communities, it's changing and we should be changing as well too. So I want to appreciate the wisdom of colleagues here who have said that it is recommended that effective services take into account the unique experiences of communities of color and culturally congruent, not just culturally aware. Don't say, okay, well, you understand that we have, quote, a different type of hair, as if it's just a bullet note. How do you hold yourself accountable to whatever I'm bringing into the community, that I'm bringing it in knowing that this has something to do with what I'm learning about that culture and what I think this culture needs. And so I want to invite and underscore this idea of cultural accountability, that whatever community we're entering into, we are accountable to that community to come in a way that's in their best interest, not in edifying our capacity to do. So this means that there's a shift, a paradigm shift is what I'm also asking for here too, that we move away from languaging, because language can be both liberating as well as limiting at the same time. We understand why we would say at-risk youth. We understand that. But that shorthand has also contributed to the complexity, because if you say to youth enough times that they are at risk, you've defined them. So why bother? You've already written me off. You told me who I am. So why should I get up and go? And more importantly, sometimes we are misinformed as to where our interventions lie when we are focused on that type of languaging. So I would say our youth are at potential in at-risk environments. And this suggests that someone should say, well, what's going on in the environment? Another one I would say too is a person, I've let go of the term slave. My ancestors were not slaves. They were enslaved persons of African ancestry. When I say to you, they were enslaved, somebody should say, really? What does that mean? What happened to them? See how it changes the conversation as opposed to limiting them, which is in honor of the work that we've talked about around trauma, which is what has happened to you versus what's wrong with you. And I would submit that looking at BIPOC communities is the epitome of this. So to start listing all the problems that are going on and ask ourselves, how is it that you even still exist given all that happened to you and is happening to you? In the understanding of that will give us more insight as to how to promote effective interventions within those communities, as well as effective interventions with all communities, including ourselves, because Black lives matter in order for all lives to matter. So how do I partner with the protective factors before climate change? I want to underscore that too, because you want to understand these communities before you have to work in them. I'm almost getting to the end so we can go to our breakout rooms. I do hope that this is generative for each of you. I'm not trying to tell you how to be, but wanting to offer more information for you to consider as you define your work. If we do this in this collective way, that all of us, then it should also promote vicarious resilience, because BIPOC communities have been surviving, thriving, and standing up in this context. And many of our stories begin way before the situations that we're in, and people forget that too. But the point I'm saying is they've already been doing it before we Western geniuses even adopted the word resilience. So how do we understand that? And then how do we join in with that as the person doing the work? becoming, and being part of, so I too can be healing and in resilience as I'm engaging in the work with them. We understand the principles of a trauma-informed approach in terms of how we want to be, the issues of trustworthiness, safety, all that we've been talking about here. But the piece I really want us to underscore too is creating systems of care that are trauma informed, which is why I applaud the work that my colleagues and others are doing under the phenomenal leadership of Bob, and the opportunities that are emerging here to really to integrate and position community wisdom with professional science for pathways forward. Fostering cultural collaborations. Here are the ethnic psychological associations that many folks do not even know exist. I like to offer because they are a resource for consultation, for learning more about us before you have to work with us, if you will, and also allowing us to be in there with you. This is an example of one that we've done called the All Healers Mental Health Alliance, which was born from Katrina, and it's under the leadership of Dr. Anel Prim, who is a member of the Black Psychiatrists Association of America, which people don't even know many times as well. Here are some of the organizations that are part of that. So we've been meeting monthly and have been intervening in cultural ways across the country in response to climate situations like in Texas, as well as in response to man-made disasters like in Flint, Michigan, and even in the Virgin Isles. Here you have this when you have a chance to review it, but here are some of the things that we've been able to do in our collective that is challenging to do as an individual organization because we're so few, and within the Association of Black Psychologists, with the partnership of the Community Healing Network. This is a toolkit that we've designed around emotional emancipation circles, which is meant to also help communities, Black communities, to remember, reclaim who they are in their own psycho-spiritual cultural wellness so they can be more empowered to do community, to do the work of healing and better partner with organizations and be good utilizers and consumers of certain events and control the narrative. So in this closing slide, my very last one, if you read nothing, please hone in on the purple in African wisdom. The color purple is important given its richness and its deepness to go into the spirit. So what I'm trying to say here is you do want to know whose house you're in. You know, and how to be there. You want to be able to center their experiences in the work in which we're bringing forward. You want to know who the wisdom keepers are. And we think about the trial that's going on right now, and I want to bring our attentions to the elder who very beautifully told us in that first week how he stopped and tried to help our dear brother Floyd know how to, quote, give in to what was happening to him in order to save his life. And this particular elder had not gone beyond the third grade, and yet he was clearly a keeper of the community, the wisdom there. So you want to know who these folks are on the ground as part of your partners, if you will, as you're going in, because it's not going to always come through organizations. Even sometimes not our churches continue to be a leader, one of many, but not the only ones. So you want to know who's got the pulse of the community on the ground. And sometimes it may be characters that you're not used to talking to, like folks who are engaged in gang life, but are also actively involved in responding in the correct way when crises hits the community. So I'm going to stop there and allow us to go into the breakout rooms. And I'm turning it back over to Bob and Keisha as I'm getting acclimated here as well.
Great. And so what we'd like to do, this is Bob. Thank you, Theopia. I've always learned so much from you and respect everything you share. It's just very, very touching and insightful. Thank you. And now we want to spend a few moments having all of you think about these issues. Keisha will post these questions in chat, but we're going to take a 10-minute breakout room and allow you time to think about the 3 questions that the OPIA has posed. First, recall a time when you entered a BIPOC community with good intentions and discovered community wisdom that demonstrated or promoted resilience. Can you share some lessons that you've learned from the field? And then what would you do differently? What would you do over? And finally, name at least 2 practical things that you can do and we can do to identify, recognize, engage, or partner with BIPOC community wisdom. So Kiyoshi is going to divide you now into your breakout rooms, and we'll take 10 minutes to discuss those questions and then come back, and Theopia is going to respond to some of your responses to it. Thank you.
Now, do I join a breakout room as well?
Would you
You're
like
gonna
to go into a breakout room with the participants? Usually you go with the trainers,
Okay, I will do that. And one thing about the word discovered, that means you didn't know it was there. It could have popped you in the face, or it could have come to as a painful lesson learned.
Right.
So welcome back, everyone. I trust that you had enough time to get into a good generative conversation. I would like to invite people to sort of share in the chat room that which you think is important to be seen by the fullness of the community. What is that you want to gift back to this community that you learned in that space? And I will defer to Bob to even select from there those that he wants to speak out into the space. This too is very important in terms of our practices about the importance of words.
Yeah, so if you can post in chat any reactions, comments, thoughts, what came up for you in the breakout session.
And then while they're doing that, Bob, I do realize that there's another piece of the time together. But I have another little bit of a clip I'd like to show, if I may, as sort of my exiting gift to the group for allowing me this space. It may be about 2 minutes. Can I do that? If we
Why don't you do that?
Minutes?
Why don't you do that now while people are putting in comments in chat? Would that work? Let's wait. That's okay.
Okay, sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. So any other comments in chat? I see Christine has a comment. Always good to connect and share, but of course we don't have enough time, never. And that's one of the issues with 90-minute sessions. Any other thoughts, comments? Nothing's popping up now. Theopia, let me ask you, if you were going to make a suggestion to these folks, many of which are clinicians or in some other way involved with the helping professions, what first couple of steps could people take to broaden their understanding, broaden their awareness, and become more open to learning who's in the room and what they've gone through and how they remain resilient?
Great question. So for the mental health providers in the room, I make an assumption or premise that we are all trained in our dominant ways. I'm a psychologist, so the American Psychological Association many times, understandably so, controls what I've been exposed to in terms of the work of Freud, Jung, and others. But yet there is a strong field of Black psychology that has not been read or critiqued in many of our educational training institutions. So one suggestion I might say is, how do you actively seek out the writings of and from communities, the BIPOC? So what is it that Black psychologists are writing about Black mental health and interventions? And so, for example, we have Intube, Ubuntu, we have optimal theory, belief systems analysis. There are several effective theoretical approaches that were born from the science of Black psychology. So how do you critique that, interpret it, interrogate to see its appropriateness within your own practice, if you will, not required, of course. I would also say too, how do you just allow yourself to be in different communities in that very in vivo, in learning, spacious way of taking it in? This is and try to let go of things like I'm not racist. That is a distraction. I would just ask everyone to never engage in a conversation as to whether or not I'm racist. Just let it go. Okay, not important. The real question is, how do I recognize where racist structures are existing within my own field of training, my own work setting, that with good intentions or intentionally can be adversely impacting my work and the spaces that I'm and the people I'm trying to work with. A concrete example I like to give is I remember becoming a mom, and I live a very different socioeconomic life than how I grew up. So my kids are going to have the best of. So I had the Cadillac um, strollers, the ones that are really big and all the bells and whistles to them. So I'm going to the mall and I realized all the doors in the mall open out this way. Now I'm an able-bodied person. So it took me a minute to fully have empathy and awareness that with good intentions, we're not making these things accessible. That same parallel process shows up in many ways, and we just have to continually ask ourselves, where else is it playing out? And also, how do we as mental health professionals find the language and the courage to explore with clients of color whether or not issues of structural racism are showing up, because many times they're not aware. And I would say to you, a lot of the behaviors that folks may be presenting with has its root cause in unexamined structural oppression and racism. And we know this to be true because we have the science that shows when you're exposed to a lot of racial trauma, it can lead to diabetes, high blood pressure, stuff like that. And it's because we too are walking around thinking we're all equal. I'm post-racial, and I didn't realize I just got, treated differently because of that. So mental health providers have got to find a way to have these conversations among ourselves and with our clients, and stop saying, well, I don't know how to bring it up. The client didn't bring it up. We know this exists. So we have to be courageous enough to do this, or we can't expect the rest of the community to do it. So it's a long-winded way, but I hope that helps, Bob.
That's very nice. Thank you. One other quick question, and then we better just share the review. But one of the questions is, how do I get resources, more information on Black psychology? I think that you had some the links to a number of organizations on the slides. Anything else you can quickly offer?
Absolutely. First of all, there is the Journal of Black Psychology. So everyone who's sitting in education, you should go back and look at your holdings and see if your librarian has a subscription to Journal of Black Psychology. There are also journals across other specialized BIPOC groups. So that's the first thing, is to ask your librarian to do that due diligence. You can also subscribe yourself. SAGE is the one who publishes it. It's a phenomenal peer learning journal event like any others. And at this point, you can also go to our website, which is www.abpsi, ABPSI's website, and see listings. And right now, where we are, please just kind of do a Google search, Black psychology, and see the multiple authors who come up. There's a plethora that's there.
Great, thank you. There's a bunch of other comments in here, but the one theme that, just if you have a second more to just talk, how would you suggest people find the wisdom keepers in their community?
Well, first of all, I would say learn the language. If I'm going into the community, I would say, who should I be talking to first? Who's got this space? Another one might be strategically looking for something we call the Council of Elders. A number of Black communities and other communities as well have really readopted that cultural value, that to become an elder is much more complex than being gifted living on this planet for a certain number of years. It is an actual responsibility and a formal role in the community. So so you can ask if there is a Council of Elders. You also do want to ask who are the religious leaders, but you also want to ask who are the youth leaders. If you want to know what's going on, who's got the youth. And many times it's not another adult. It really are other youths. Sometimes at different counties, they've created a youth council. So to your point, you just want to kind of go in and be curious and ask the questions and look and see.
Wonderful. There's many more wonderful comments coming up from chat. I wish we had the time for them, but we don't. Thank you so much again, Theopia, as usual, for a wonderful presentation. Let's see your video.
So another thing that's important to me as I continue my own growth and journey in this work is to always bring the wisdom of the people with me. It's a great way of keeping me grounded and clear. So I want to, when I think about where we collectively are in this moment in our country and the pain that we are collectively enduring and being exposed to, I'd like to leave you with this particular video. It's important because you'll begin to see the multi-generational space. So Ella's song was originally done by a group in DC called, oh my goodness, where'd they go? Oh, Sweet Honey on the Rock. Oh, whew, an a cappella group of phenomenal Black African activists. And it was done in reference to the work of our dear Ella Baker. This is the way in which our youth have reclaimed this classic song and made it their own. So I wanted to leave you with this image to close out and to continue to illustrate the power of collective resilience.
Turn up the volume.
You can't hear it?
Yeah, no, it's quiet.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop for a second. Maybe I changed, I probably need to do my computer thing again. Let me see if this works. Oh, nope. Well, it's here now. Oh, sorry. Well, you did say you hadn't had any problems with your technology, and then I came along.
This is nothing.
What are you doing? Go back. Come on. Okay, let me just open it back up again.
What I want to know is how every time you hit something, it sounds like you're playing ping pong there.
I know, and I don't understand it either myself, because I keep losing at the game. Okay, let me test this one.
It's still soft.
Okay, let me stop this for 1 second.
I don't know if Keisha, if you're on the line, if you have any
Okay,
suggestions.
hold on. Oh no, I'll get it. Sometimes the spirits aren't working in my favor, but that's just an opportunity. Let me stop this one. Start it back here. I'm just gonna do all my steps over again that I've been taught by my millennials.
No kidding.
I'll go here. Okay, my volume is up. Now I'm gonna share my slide. Thank you all for your patience. And when I share my slide, I'm gonna make sure I share my computer sound. Okay, yep, I just did it. And this has got to work. And we go from current slide and go.
Will believe in freedom cannot rest.
Thank you, ancestors. Thank you, spirits.
Thank you, millennials.
Exactly.
Freedom cannot rest until it comes. Will believe in freedom cannot rest. Freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers, sons is as important as the killing of white men, be just one and a number as we stand against tyranny. To me, young people come first, they come first. They have the courage where we fail. If I can just shine a light on as they carry us
We have no
through
other
the
choice, people.
gale.
There's no going
We
back.
who believe in
We
freedom
must move forward in new ways, in different ways.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard.
So we are not giving voice to people. We are making ourselves listen to
I'll bow to no man's word.
their voice.
We who believe
We just have to listen
freedom
differently
cannot rest.
because silence is a voice.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Come on, sing. We who
Feel the
believe
power.
in freedom cannot rest.
Inspiration to keep moving
We who
forward.
believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom, we cannot rest. We cannot rest. We who believe in freedom, we cannot rest. We cannot rest. We who believe in freedom, we
Now
cannot
we're
rest.
saying
We
we
cannot
cannot
rest. We
rest
who believe in freedom,
This
we
is a
cannot
human
rest. We
problem.
cannot rest. We who believe in freedom, we cannot rest. We will not rest. We who believe in freedom, we cannot
Somebody
rest.
turning while we're resting. Rest in power. Rest in His writing.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe.
Thank you so very much for allowing me to share this with you. And it's part of my own resilience and healing to stay in these types of conversations. You are
Thank you,
symbols of hope.
Theopia. Thank you, Theopia. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. Okay.
Take care.
I'm going
We'll
to
talk
read
to
the
you
chat
soon.
room.
Okay. I'm going to try to get my slides back up, but I see they're not there. So hang on a second. Let's see what happened to my slides. There we are. Can you see those? Are those up now?
No, not yet, Bob.
Okay. Okay. So I want to just spend the last half hour, first of all, again, thanking Theopia for the wonderful presentation. And then I want to just spend the last hour talking about what we've learned, try to put it into a context for you and add some other details. And one of the things we've learned, or I hope that's made an impression or become clear, is that we really are in the midst of a civilization changing event. We've had all these traumatic experiences, the traumas and toxic stresses and the intersectionality of them, and they have led to the climate emergency. I call it the trauma scene, where it's going to be more cumulative traumas, repetitive traumas, and overwhelming stresses facing many, many people. The ITRC has members down in Australia. They have one fire, then drought, then heat wave after another. We're seeing these all over the world. We just have to realize we have to prepare ourselves for what's coming. And I'm not going to go through the details of these, but this is some of the issues we talked about earlier, that if we leave these issues unaddressed, if we don't begin to build community-based, culturally accountable, population-level capacity for mental wellness and resilience, we're going to see just skyrocketing levels of mental health impacts, psychosocial impacts, physical illnesses and diseases that are connected to the stresses and traumas, rising cost, and those fear-based reactions that among individuals and groups and whole communities that cause people to retreat into a self-protective survival mode that makes them uninterested in solving any of these issues. And we're seeing a lot of that in the US and other countries already. And our mental health and psychosocial support systems are crisis in illness systems, actually. And they're based on the medical model of health that has a lot of validity in some ways, but they do not foster individual and collective wellness and resilience for repetitive, cumulative, intersectional traumas and toxic stresses. That's not what they're set up to do. The medical model of health is a crisis and illness-based system. And I'd go further. I think if you do some research, you'll find that no society has ever promoted health and wellness with individualistic approaches alone. And that's why our current mental health and psychosocial support system can't prevent or heals today's psychological and behavioral and emotional problems. In fact, even before the pandemic, only about 50% of Americans that experienced significant mental health or psychosocial problems could get any kind of assistance. And now during the pandemic, at best, about a quarter of the people that need this kind of help can get it. And moving forward, the current system has no chance of addressing the traumas, the mental health, psychosocial issues that the trauma scene will provide. It's just not the system that can do that. It's going to be important to maintain that system, but it's not the system that can do that. And we desperately quickly need to expand our approach to building prevention-focused, community-based, culturally accountable, population-level mental wellness and resilience. So I'm just going to add some details about how you can begin to work on this. This is, I've been spent a lot of my previous life in systems dynamics and systems thinking. And this is one of the ways to think about systems change, that this is the pyramid. And most of the time, what we spend our lives doing is our common focus is dealing with daily events and crises at the top of the pyramid. And that's natural. That's what we have to do. We get up in the morning, we have to deal with the stuff that's in front of us. But if we start to look below that, it's sort of like an iceberg, that the most important structure of what's happening is hidden below the surface. And we have to peel back the blinders that we have and look below the surface. And what we see almost always is that there's a series of patterns and trends that create the daily events and crises we deal with. And just that awareness alone can lead to more capacity to make different decisions, create different policies, programs, et cetera, for that address those daily events. But if we look below those patterns and trends and look for the systemic structures, the policies, the infrastructure that we call the hard systems, but also the soft systems, the norms, the trust levels, the communication styles that exist, that dominate, we can see that that's what's creating those patterns and trends which show up as a daily crisis we deal with. And if we're willing to go even further below the systemic structures and look at our mental models, the assumptions, beliefs, and myths and attitudes that people hold that shape how they think and act, we then see and understand how we get certain kinds of systemic structures that create certain kinds of patterns and trends that show up as the daily events that we deal with. And if we're really willing to go below that, even the mental models, and look at the past experiences people had and the ongoing, we then understand what can shape their the way people think and see the world, their mental models, and again, rises up through the pyramid. So you get greater leverage for change the further down in the pyramid you go. And we often get stuck in the dealing with the daily crisis, especially in the field most of you and we are in, where one person after next or one population needs assistance. And so we deal with the daily events. But if you take the time to look below that in the pyramid, you're going to get much greater possibility for systems change. And systems change is possible if we change make different choices. And it's true at any moment in time, certain mental models dominate. And today it's the crisis and illness approach, at least in Western communities and societies, for addressing traumas and toxic stresses. But a cultural change is a conscious choice. When we make the choice to examine and alter our assumptions and beliefs and myths, et cetera, change can actually happen rather quickly. And as soon as we change our mental models, we open ourselves up to new thinking, beliefs, ideas, then we can create the new systems and policies, which will produce different patterns and trends, which will generate new types of daily events we deal with. See if I can get this slide to change. So here's one way to, again, from a systems thinking perspective, a way to sort of move forward in terms of your work in the future and engaging in these issues. This is the hierarchy of choices. The most fundamental choice we all need to make as we think about, do we want to engage in building community-based, culturally accountable, population-level mental wellness and resilience is why? Why do we want to do that? What's our purpose? Start there, be clear about that. Then go to the next level of what we call the primary choice, which is what do we want to achieve? What's our vision and our principles that we're going to try to use to achieve that vision? Then you go to the next stage, which is how are we going to achieve that vision to attain that purpose? That's strategy. And then you go to the next stage, which is after you create that strategy, what tactics are going to we use? What specific actions? And then you create an action plans, who, when, who's going to do what and when, and how are we going to learn from all this? And then the last step is where do we embed these changes? And that is what policies do we want to create, what structures, et cetera. My experience over many years in this field has been that most of the time we start off with tactics, any kind of change effort, or even the last step, we want new policies. We're working on that ourselves before people have actually made a different fundamental choice, clarified their what they want to achieve, developed a strategy, et cetera. And it often, even if you are successful by starting at the upper ends of the hierarchy of choices, usually people find workarounds to that, or you fail completely, or people ignore it. So the more you can really be very clear with yourself and with the groups, the people you work with about these fundamental choices that really are the base of the hierarchy of choices, the better off you're going to be, the more chance you're going to have of really creating some significant change. And we've described the wheel of change, as we called it, for building community-based, culturally accountable, population-level mental wellness and resilience. And we more or less followed this pattern as we ran through the training program. We started with how do you organize a resilience coordinating council, as we call it, but again, you can call it anything you want in a community, by bringing together uncommon partners in the community to work together and making a community-based effort. That group assesses the local strengths, the obstacles, who the wisdom keepers are, as Theopia called them. Judith Landau called them who the community links are. And they create a vision and a goal of strategies for how we're going to build population level resilience, mental wellness and resilience. That group, that vision should include different elements, interrelated elements that would educate everyone, all adults and youth, in some basic age and culturally accountable and demographically accountable skills. You want to strengthen, connect social support networks across boundaries. We want to try to empower residents to take responsibility for resilience at the neighborhood level. And you want to continually evaluate, learn, and improve all that. And once you've got some successes, then you try to embed those practices and policies and approaches in public or in local organizational practices and public policies. One of the ways to start is, if you want to now begin to try to move forward on this, is to determine the extent to which your community is trauma organized. And what trauma organized means, it's organized around the ways to protect itself from trauma, from harm, et cetera, rather than to build wellness and resilience. Father Abernathy last week talked about this, that he actually completed an assessment and realized that the neighborhoods in Pittsburgh where he worked were trauma organized. They were experienced, the BIPOC communities there had experienced ongoing racism and poverty and all sorts of other traumas, and that helped him realize what he should do. So these are some of the traits you can look at. I'm not going to go through all of it, but is there constant physical or psychological, emotional violence and a low sense of safety in the community? I'm just going to quickly jump around to go to the right. Is there a lack of good emotional self-regulation? Is there rigid and often punitive or retaliatory rules and regulations? Moving further, is there groupthink and constant conflict? By groupthink, we mean people are afraid to raise alternative views because of criticism, et cetera, so everybody stays silent. And you can look at the rest of these. You can do your own assessment and then form a small group, 3 to 4 people, friends, family, colleagues, and take the information, say, look, we've just done this back of the envelope assessment and found that our community is trauma organized. And go to the local civic leaders, nonprofit, neighborhood leaders, et cetera, and educate them about this. And look at, here's how trauma and toxic stresses are already affecting us and are likely to affect us in the future. And that can really begin to really build some awareness. And don't forget, when you do that, to include the existing and likely near and long-term direct and indirect impacts of the climate emergency. And what I mean by indirect and direct is food shortages somewhere else are going to show up as higher prices in your community. That's an indirect one. Or the lack of a drought somewhere else might affect something, or migration might happen, in migration, because people are out migrating somewhere else. So you got to sort of share all this information and just put together a back of the envelope sort of message and go meet with people and start building that awareness. I want to just share a story of creating sanctuary in the Dalles, Oregon. This is a rural community. And it was up the Columbia River Gorge. And this is the story from Trudy Townsend, who's been on our steering committee for a long time, who started with the North Wasco County School District. They had all sorts of problems in the Dalles, and they just did a brief assessment of what's happening in our community. And they realized it was trauma organized. They had knee-jerk policies, and everything was crisis driven. There were all sorts of people suing each other. She called it left field lawsuits, lots of personal threats. People felt overwhelmed. And there was lots of hypersensitivity and other things. And part of the issue was that the indigenous Native American community was very split from the white community that came to that area to build a big dam, the Dalles Dam. And that was never addressed. That split and also the poverty that came out of that affected this. So she just drew this little diagram and started to share it with a lot of community members and help people understand. And their small group confirmed that the community was trauma organized. Trauma is the central problem. And she brought a bunch of speakers in to talk about what does a trauma organized community mean? And this is a small rural community in Oregon, and yet they were able to do this. And this led to some big, what she called big courageous conversations in the Dalles, where people said, whoa, what's going on here? Is that really what's happening? And people had to grasp with it. And the woman on from first person on the front on the left side is Sandy Bloom, who you heard from in this presentation. She came out and was one of the people that gave the talks. So one of the questions is, how can you help your community realize the extent to which it's trauma organized, or your neighborhood? You can work at the neighborhood level. You can work at the organizational level too. But think about that. And then after people become aware of it, you can begin to very carefully and systematically expand your core group into an expansive and diverse resilience coordinating council. As we said, you really want to bring the entire system together here, people representing every population and every sector, to jointly co-create and implement, continually evaluate and improve culturally accountable, age and demographically appropriate mental wellness and resilience building activities. There's a whole range of people and individuals to think about who to reach out to engage. But I think those wisdom seekers that Theopia talked about are really one of the keys. So one of the things that I'd like to ask you to do, not now, but you can take this and think about it. Who can you ask to participate in a resilience coordinating council in your community? Just sort of really begin to think that through. And we talked also in one of the very first sessions about how to organize this. I'm not going to go through it again, but you really want to, if you can, create some sort of formal or informal board or steering committee. That's what the inside circle is. Neighborhood leaders, business leaders, mental health leaders, grassroots leaders, et cetera. Maybe nominate a chair or co-chair, an executive committee. But then you want folks working with all sorts of different groups and populations and sectors in the community in different ways. And we call them innovation teams, so private sector, grassroots leader innovation teams. And they ought to continue to participate in the Resilience Coordinating Council and let you know what they're doing so you can stay coordinated, et cetera. And, oops, wrong way here. So how do you staff a Resilience Coordinating Council? We're going to be short of time, so I'm going to zip through a bunch of these. But sometimes you can run one of these groups as an all volunteer group. Many of them start that way, but this does require some skilled leaders that are willing to really commit time. So when possible, try to hire a full-time coordinator as soon as possible. If you don't, interest can often peter out, we find. But it takes time to find the right person. They must really possess very exemplary interpersonal and conflict resolution skills, but also they've got to be very humble. Their goal has got to be to commit to serve others and make your group function well, rather than promote their own funding or fame or power or future ambitions, et cetera. And you need funding to do that. And for funding, the first step is to try to develop a budget that says, well, what would we pay as a coordinator, half-time or full-time? And then the members of your group, your Resilience Coordinating Council, or whatever you call it, can begin to ask for donations from residents, nonprofit organizations, et cetera. You've got to find a fiscal sponsor to do that. And usually it's best to find a local government agency or nonprofit that will do that at no cost. So they can take in the funds, but they won't charge you. As soon as possible, when you get your group in good enough shape, form a fundraising committee to develop a plan and a funding pitch to go out to donors, organizations and public sources. And then you can also raise funding. A lot of groups start by raising fundings by partnering with local universities. So they come in, they go get a big grant, they give you part of the money, but they pay their grad students and others to do some research on your program, and that's how you can make some funding. In the DALS program, Trudy Townsend became the staff. She was actually working for the school district at the time. The school district allowed her to be funded by them, but to go and work on creating sanctuary in the Dalles. The North Wasco School District became the fiscal sponsor, and they raised funds from a variety of sources. So one thing to keep in mind is, how can you fund your program? And one of the first actions should be to complete a community assessment, to gather information about what's happening in the community now, what has happened in the past, I'm sorry, I'm speeding through these because I thought we had more time, but you really want to know the cultural and geographic makeup of the community, how the community dealt with past and current adversities, what are the strengths, resources, and skills that people have, individuals and groups have in the communities, and what factors prohibit or block the influence of those strengths, and what individuals are accepted and trusted by different populations that can be asked to participate in it. These are the wisdom keepers and the links, as Judith Landau calls them. And then you want to create a vision. You want to take that information, create an ideal vision of population level mental wellness and resilience for your community. You can use ends planning to do that. I'm going to skip this slide. You can look at how to do ends planning later. In the DALs, this led to all sorts of creative conversations, and people decided to re-script the future of the DALs. That's their term. And that led to some big, hairy, audacious goals, as they called it. They used the 4 pillars of the sanctuary model that Sandy Bloom talked about a little bit. These are commitments to nonviolence, true participation in decision-making, et cetera, based on trauma theory and a number of tools. You can also use this model, which is sort of the flip side of what a trauma-organized community looks like. You can just look here and say, this is our vision. We want residents to embrace, and officials to embrace learning, growth, and change. We want emotionally well-regulated individuals and groups. We want policies, regulations, and norms that foster trust, health, and safety. And you can read the rest of these. But you create that strategy, and then that vision, then you back up and create a strategy to achieve it. And the strategy should address the same issues I've already talked about that we looked at in the Wheel of Change, in strengthening the social support networks, working at the neighborhood level, changing social norms, and then motivating local organizations of all kinds to engage in this activity. And you want to continue to learn and improve what you're doing, because the initial actions are likely not going to be as successful as you hope. And many populations, many individuals are not going to engage. They want to watch and see what's happening before they engage. So you want to continually evaluate what you're doing, learn, grow, and improve. And that's essential. And when people learn, they actually change their mental models. And so when you try to do that learning and growth, make sure you focus on both learning from the personal level for the Resilience Coordinating Council, and learning that assists the community and neighborhood with its needs. Then you'll be successful. And after you've done that, then try to engage local organizations and ask them to make a commitment to building community-based mental wellness and resilience, and even to sign an MOU. So here in Walla Walla, Washington, with Terry Barilla, one of our steering committee members, she's gone to local communities, organizations, and asked them to sign and make a commitment to trauma-informed practices. And they signed this little declaration as an informal way. But she's also developed much more formal memorandums of understanding, and you can read all through this. They sign it and say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z now in our organization, and it affects their employees, it affects their stakeholders, their clients, et cetera. And they got the city to issue a proclamation for different aspects of, they called it Resilience Month, Awareness Month in Walla Walla, and then they actually got the city to adopt resilience policies. And this is just one example, but Terry Pearl is willing to share this. In the Dalles, this approach led to some significant successes. It was eventually named one of the 10 best cities to live in Oregon about 5 years ago by Oregon Magazine. You would have knocked everybody over with a feather to think that that could ever happen in the Dalles, because of just what it was known for. So change is really possible. And what we know is that these programs can be very cost effective. These community-based prevention programs tend to yield between $2 to $10 in savings for every dollar invested in healthcare, criminal and juvenile justice, and other factors. And as Judith Landau said during her presentation, what her research found is that for every single family or close support member that needs to be replaced, you need 5 external social supports, leaders. So it shows how difficult and expensive it is to rely on clinical treatment and direct service programs, let alone the lack of effectiveness. So I just want to ask you to imagine the benefits of a resilience coordinating council in your community and in communities worldwide. Can we begin to do this? And ask you how you can make a difference in your community in this way. And what initial actions are you willing to take to make that difference? And who can you ask to help you with that endeavor? And those are just questions to think about as we close the session. I want to just offer one other comment. I want to talk about the difference between management and leadership. Management is a set of processes that keeps complicated systems of people and technology running smoothly. It involves planning and budgeting and organizing and staffing, et cetera. These are qualities of control. But leadership is very different. It's a set of processes that help human communities shape their futures and embrace and sustain significant change. So leadership helps define what the future should look like and mobilizes people to work towards that despite all sorts of obstacles. And it encourages and it role models good emotional management. And it responds to crisis by motivating people to use it to learn, grow, and increase well-being. Leadership, these qualities are qualities of influence. And management and leadership are both needed. But what I've seen is most mental wellness and resilience building initiatives are vastly overmanaged and underled. We're not going to manage our way to population level mental wellness and resilience. Exemplary leadership is going to be required. And that's what you all can provide if you choose. So remember that the choices we all make today are going to determine the future. And just like you to consider what new and different choices you can and are willing to make. So I want to thank you for participating in the ITRC training program on building community-based mental wellness and resilience. This was our first go around at it, and we want to continue to improve the program. So there is an evaluation now in chat. We'll send it to you afterwards. Please complete the evaluation. It asks about today's presentations, but most of it is going to be about the program as a whole. And as part of that, we're going to ask if you are willing to offer a quote that we can use with your name that we might be able to use down the road to promote it. So I hope you will fill that out. And with that, I just want to say thank you all again for participating. I don't know if the Opie is still alive, and I want to thank the Opie again for joining us. And I just want to wish you all the best in your efforts and your work professionally and in helping to build community-based mental wellness and resilience. I applaud all of you for all the work you've done and wish you all the best down the road. Thank you all for participating. We hope to see you all soon. Take care, everybody.